Carl Fey. I'm a professor of international business at Aalto University School of Business in Helsinki, Finland. And on behalf of the teaching committee of the International Management Division of the Academy of Management, I would like to welcome you to the first of our spring seminar series focusing on various issues inside of teaching international business. Today, we're going to be focusing about innovative approaches and innovative players besides business schools inside of executive education. And indeed, as the landscape inside of executive education is rapidly changing, it is a timely time to think about what players besides business schools are doing. And thus, today we're lucky to have a variety of interesting innovators with us. Indeed, the landscape is changing in many different ways. Clients seem to want to ensure that we just don't teach content, but that we teach it in ways that it can be readily implemented and even sometimes want us to help with implementation. Blended programs seem to be increasingly in demand, combining online and in-person executive education. Clients seem to be increasingly cost conscious and wanting to have us prove that we're adding value. And of course, new technologies like VR are offering interesting opportunities for us. So we're very lucky to have a number of people today to discuss these and other themes with us. We're joined by, first of all, my co-organizer, Howard Yu, who's a professor at IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland. In addition, we also have Britta Börjeson, who is the person who led the project to develop Volvo Group's corporate university and is now Vice President of Learning Experience at, Learning Expertise at Volvo Group University. We also have Blair Sheppard, who is the Global Leader of Strategy and Leadership at PwC and the former President of Duke CE and Dean of Duke Fuqua School of Business. And we have Jena Davidson, the founder and CEO of Jenson 8, a company using VR to facilitate leadership development management training. Each of these people is going to make a 10 to 15 minute presentation, after which there will be 5 minutes for more directed questions for these people. You can type your questions as you're hearing the talks in the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of Zoom. And we also can unmute some people at the end for more extensive questions. After we have these questions, these presentations, we will have a broader discussion where I will moderate a panel where I'll ask some questions, but also we would love to have some questions from the audience. So please be thinking about these questions that are more broadly related to the themes of how one can be innovative in executive education, which we're discussing today. To start us off, though, I would like to turn over to the co-organizer of today's session, Howard Yu, to give us some inspiration, a little bit of an overview of what he sees as some key trends in terms of the way executive education is changing. Howard has his DBA from Harvard Business School and is the Legel Professor of Management and Innovation at IMD. Given his focus on innovation, it's a particularly ideal time to have him talk to us today. He's the author of the award-winning book, Leap: How to Thrive in a World Where Everything Can Be Copied. And he also, in 2015, was selected by Ports and Quants to be one of the world's top 40 business professors under 40, and in 2018, appeared on the Thinkers 50 radar list. Without further ado, over to you, Howard, to set the stage for us.
Thank you so much, Carl. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm no longer under 40, so time flies along the way. So great to meet many of you here, and I'm sure it's going to be quite an interactive session along the way. And I saw in the audience, among the participants, there are those I actually know before, so great to reconnect it and making new friends along the way. I just want to give a little bit of the backdrop of today's discussion and just to ground us ourselves in how the executive education landscape continue to evolve. And I think for most of us, we really felt changes is happening. And if anything, it feels like a great acceleration. And I think a lot of these comes down to how we work and play is actually affecting how we learn. in the end, executive education is no others than having a group of humans coming together to explore new set of ideas, and the context or the contextual background of how we conduct our day-to-day businesses and how we entertain ourselves at home essentially have shaped that expectation of our participant. As a result, what we have been observing from an IMD perspective at least is the client expectation corporate university rapidly evolve, and it also opens up new opportunity for new player to coming along, having very, very different core capability or core competency, providing something rather unique that historically perhaps traditional business school doesn't have. And so I just want to ground our discussion on what we have been seeing on how things have been evolved. And I will share with all of you sort of a typical prototype or typical design from what has been emerging because of the pandemic and has accelerated a number of key trends. But here are the key trends if you want to think about, right? Because there are things that just a temporary displacement on the bottom left-hand corner, meaning these are trends that changes, including within the executive education, that you think and you believe would go back to normal. For instance, in the early of the pandemic, we actually see the drop in executive education in terms of revenue worldwide. And that is basically a temporary displacement. And then, things could return to normal. But then we've got to, of course, pay attention to areas that has a long-lasting structural change, whether it's new type of innovation that we saw on the right-hand bottom corner. So Jena later on would talk a little bit as an example of new type of innovation bringing into the space of exec ed that will not going away, because once you put that down, it's going to drive growth going forward. Then there are catalysts, trend translated into the exec ed space that it would continue to accelerate because these has been catalyzed in our space and it would not go away. The change would continue to get accelerated. So from that angle, I thought it would be useful to reflect at a point, what are some of the key area of the way we work and play is directly affecting how people learn. One key element, of course, is the bandwidth boom. I remember back in the early part of the pandemic, when we host online, virtual session, our audience, even at home, they are not very used to that mode of communication. There are broad bandwidth issues, and quite frankly, even some of the platforms are not quite up to speed. If you think about even Microsoft Teams, when it first launched in the early pandemic, there are lots of functionalities not quite there yet. There's no breakout groups, for instance, and people need to jump into channel and things like that. But once these tech giant and telco companies are expanding this infrastructure is not going to go away. What's interesting, of course, once the infrastructure is putting in place, then the cost of usage per unit cost would come down. That allows new player to take advantage of this abundance of infrastructure and come up with new value proposition, new format in order to drive usage. So that is one area that we see has a long-lasting effect. But going forward, right, the way we play in private is also very different, right? When people are getting used to a lot of the Netflix, a lot of the social media platform, but it's also even Discord. If you have kids playing video game, they probably are on Discord. And so people are really used to online collaboration, discussing ideas, that it doesn't need to collaborate only when people are on the face-to-face. The deep implication for exec ed is, our client or our participant are expecting they could come together in a space to on a distance to collaborate in a deep form and generate creative thinking as well. How we think about a classroom discussion, of course, immediately shift. This is another thing. I think also a lot of our participants are quite happy to try new platform as well. This is key because historically what we have observed among executive audience is they are rather conservative in adopting technology. I remember early phase when we asked people to try out even Zoom, people resist. But now we ask people to try Miro, we ask people to try different type of collaboration tool. They just taken a point themselves. Because again, the pandemic have trained people to consume content in a different way. As a result, they go back to the workplace. They expect it's kind of okay. We'll try something. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it works out, but we're willing to be agile. And that, in fact, have opened up new opportunity for new players coming into this space, as well as for business school. If we want to try new tool, it becomes possible. Now, you could almost do a map, direct mapping, right? I use this example as an entertainment industry, but you could map it to directly to Exec ad. That, ongoing wise, you would expect, for Exec ad, the live, meaning really face-to-face opportunity may get reduced, but then the in-home on distant usages would be more, whether it's digital, or you could think about other self-paced learning. That potential in the portfolio will shift. In the past, Exec at the key column or key pillar is really on the face-to-face learning, creating the event. That shift probably is going to stay with us and not going to change. What all that means is you could think about three things. One is the core competency is radically shift. Business school excel on the face-to-face classroom experience. That ha-ha moment coming along. With things on distance, this is not exactly what business school are good at. We are very good as artists, but then there are new core competency coming along, and the winner probably are the one who can blend in this domain knowledge, plus the new type of capability, blending the two to provide an updated holistic experience to the participant, depending on their circumstances would win. The second is almost this whole shift from an integrated solution to a modular menu. And I think from corporate university, they see and experience that front and center. In the sense that in the past, it's quite common to invite a business school to basically architect everything. But now we're beginning to see clients essentially taking the role of orchestration more and more, because the expectation is, given all of these are both blended in online and face-to-face, it becomes modularized. You still need the glue. And the learning organization across many companies, I see they are stepping up in playing the role as the orchestration across. And then the last thing is kind of paradoxical and interesting, is the radical premiumization of face-to-face experience. People don't feel it's necessary to always fly out and going into one place anymore. But we are social animal, and that building trust is still very much rooted in face-to-face experience. But when that happens, for instance, people do expect it to have an extremely wow effect. So it's almost like either we don't do it, and when we do it, it has to be so memorable. It becomes part of the employee experience, a lasting memory for people to take home. And the search for impact is also being raised as well. So I just want to show from sort of my perspective of what is changing. And all of this is really rooted because how we play and how we work fundamentally shift the consumer preferences in this case. And as a result, there are new opportunities coming up.
So thank you very much, Howard, for inspiring introduction to set the stage for us. We'll now turn over to our first external speaker, Britta Börjeson, who, as I've mentioned, is the Senior Vice President of Learning Expertise at Volvo Group. And most relevant for us, she led the project to develop Volvo Group's corporate university. Britta, who is really passionate about trying to find ways that one can not only teach content well, but help people to be able to apply the content that's been taught, is going to talk a little bit about this application today. So Britta, over to you.
Good. You can hear me?
We can, but we don't see you yet. Can you turn on
No.
your video?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to turn my video. The host has stopped my video. So if you please do that, I would be grateful.
Okay, I've asked you to start it now. I hope that works.
Yeah, good. I hope so too.
We see you. Thanks.
Great. So let me then share my window again. Okay, let's try this one. Tell me when you see it. Can you see it?
So now we see it, yes.
Yeah, and in the format that you want as well. Perfect. Okay, so I just wanted to set the scene a bit for what I will share. Volvo Group, I think all of you know about the Volvo Group, but just a few figures then. Now I see something else on my screen, but that doesn't matter. Or
we I think we see Volvo Group 2021 net sales, etc.
Okay, I see something else, but that's I'll manage. I try to manage. So I'm just a bit lost here because I need to move forward of the presentation. I'll try to do that somehow. No, it doesn't work. I have a man
maybe if you stop
sharing
your screen once and reshare it, I would recommend that.
I'll have to do that. So I see your screen, I think. So let's try again.
Yes, we see the same slide in nice format.
Yeah, and I still don't see it. That's my problem.
Let me do the following.
Okay.
Then. Why don't you stop sharing? I will get it and I will share it. Just give me a second.
Completely lost.
Okay, so we go here. So hopefully everyone should now see the slides, and I will move forward them. Just tell me when you want to change slides.
Super. Thank you very much. That's easier for me, at least, not being a Zoom user. So just setting the scene then. Volvo Group is present on almost 200 markets, which is more or less all of the UN countries, member countries around the world. Last year, 2021, we had a great turnover, 367 billion Swedish krona, an operating income of 43 billion Swedish krona, and an operating margin of 11.6%. We are 95,000 employees. And some of the events and accomplishments during last year is, for example, the heavy-duty truck fully electric. It's one of the trucks that you can see on the slide here on the picture at the front of our annual report, passing then the 400-kilometer stretch. Then also fully electric buses in Gothenburg. We have 145 fully electric buses at this moment in Gothenburg, delivered not only the vehicles, but also, of course, in partnerships and also the charging infrastructure. And also Volvo Construction Equipment launched their electric site project. So this is just a teaser to see where we are going. So please change to next slide. So Volvo Group, just like it was mentioned in the introduction, the type of competences that we are looking at now is much, much different compared to before pandemic, we can say. And also the accelerated need of these competences. So in the image you see here, not only fully electric buses, they are also connected. and they are also autonomous to a great extent, and they can detect things in the environment. So in order to have the products and the services needed to supply to our customers, we need, for example, AI and machine learning competence, blockchain competence. We need to understand cybersecurity. Of course, programming is a much more sought after competence than just a few years ago. So you see the list here of competences that are new requirements for us. So just to summarize this, if we go to the next slide. Volvo Group has a mission, of course, driving prosperity through transport and infrastructure solutions. And just 3 years ago, the word infrastructure wasn't there. And when you see the type of products and services that we are now offering, you can understand that also engaging in infrastructure is really critical, for example, for electromobile solutions. The aspirations are have a leading customer satisfaction for all brands in their segments, be the most admired employer in our industry, and have industry-leading profitability. So caring both about customers, employees, and our stakeholders. So this is what is really guiding us when it comes to the investment in learning and development. So let's move forward. Learning and development in Volvo Group, and I'm representing the corporate university. We manage, we are responsible for training and learning in areas that typically are common across several organizations. Not necessarily, sometimes it's very specific solutions that we are providing. But typically that is where we are. So we are not dealing, for example, with the for the retail organizations, training sales personnel on the market or service personnel, for example. This lies within the business areas. But a lot of the other areas and competence areas we are responsible for. So let's move forward then to see, when we talk about adult learning, we want to understand, of course, how can we be successful with adult learning? And early on, we established 3 principles. The first one is adults draw upon their experience to aid their learning, consciously make use of it. And in the last few years, I think this is even better understood by us and by others. You are familiar with the research in neuroscience. And you've probably been in training situations and learning situations where you have felt a bit threatened because you have a trainer, a lecturer, or someone who is telling you things that you already know. This is a typical situation for many of us. So if we are not making use of the experience that people bring to the learning situation, there is a risk that people will close their minds and they will not be open then to learning new things. So this is why this is our first principle, to make use of it. Also, just as kids, we prefer action and we learn best by doing, using our bodies. And of course, we also, in the context of the company, we also need to mimic the real environment as closely as possible. So bringing the reality of participants into the training situation. Also, learning happens in the day-to-day context and activities, the context of day-to-day activities and needs. And managers, they need to understand and reinforce learning on the job. And this is something that is most challenging, but we are doing a lot of efforts to make the managers feel part of and engaged in the learning journey of their employees. So let's move forward just to learn a bit more about the manager engagement and how vital this is. This is research by Robert Brinkerhoff. I'm sure that many of you have heard of Robert Brinkerhoff. And he's done research during the past decades on the application. How likely is it that participants will apply and use what they have learned? So here we have a person who has a need to learn new things, and she participates in a training, in an activity, and she learns then to master this in the safe environment in the training. So she's preparing to apply, but she's not yet applying it. So next click, please, Carl. And when she gets back home and she's expected to apply, then of course, if she's successful, and what she has learned becomes active and is also then producing results in her home organization, in the operations. And in the end, we will satisfy customers. But the interesting part here is, if we work in a traditional way, we know that 1 out of 8 participants, they go home and they never try. They never try to use what they have learned. We know that 1 out of 8, they try and they succeed. But we also know that 6 out of 8 participants go home, try, but fail. And why do they fail? Could be a lot of different things. Could be time. Maybe they've been away for a couple of days on training and they come back and they have a pile of things that need their attention. It could also be awkward, or maybe taking more time also for the team where they are in. Maybe they say, okay, well, let's try this. I've just been in training and this is what I learned. And everyone will say, no, maybe next time. So you recognize this, that there is a big hinder for participants or for any person then to just start to apply. This is the challenge, and we are determined to overcome this challenge. So let's move on. Another part of research that has really moved forward is around, it's connected to neuroscience, of course, and it is about the psychological safety. I'm sure that you have heard of it. The SCARF model is a very simple model. There are, of course, other models and other ways to do this, but this is something that we think of and that we want to embed in our different training programs. And I can mention also during the pandemic, and of course now as well, we, as many others, we have turned our instructor-led programs into virtual instructor-led programs. It has some limitations, but it also has some real great advantages. For example, that we are able to reach out to the smaller markets where we don't have that many employees, for example. So the diversity of the groups has really increased. And then, of course, when you don't see people live, you cannot sense, someone who's really hesitant, or you cannot see maybe persons and what happens in between two persons in the room. Then being aware of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, that these are aspects that we need to have a control over, and as facilitators to be really aware of and sensitive to. So if we just take status, for example, it's our relative importance to others. And I'm sure that you've been in teams where you've been maybe a bit of an outsider and everyone already knows each other, for example. It can be the way that you are approached or invited, or maybe not invited to participate in dialogue. It can be also diversity. So maybe you feel really alone. Yeah, a lot of people have same experience and same background. Also certainty. So this is a lot about, for example, ways of working, transparency, and in a training situation, having good insight into why do we do this and what will happen next. Autonomy, it's also feeling that you have control yourself over the events and the way that things go. Relatedness, how safe you feel together with others. So how well do you know them? And this is one reason why we put quite a lot of effort in getting to know each other in these virtual situations, but in any learning situation. And then fairness, how we perceive the exchange between people to be, how fair that exchange is. Are some people getting a lot of airtime, for example? Is there a lot of questions and a lot of curiosity in one area, one topic where I'm not involved or where I don't have the knowledge, for example? So this is even more critical with virtual, but of course it is critical also in a face-to-face or physical situation. So these are some of the fundamentals that we apply and that we use then in training of our employees in all types of situations, in all types of contexts. So let's look at then how can we learn? If you take the next slide, please, Carl. So we learn in many ways. And as you see here, I put on the job training on top. So this is where we learn a lot every day. At the bottom, we have the formal learning, and this is typically where we get the knowledge base, which is critical. But if you look to the right, we have the 70, 20, 10, and the 10 is, of course, the formal part. We cannot neglect it just because it's a small part. And of course, the 70, practicing and doing on the job, the 20 typically then exchanging with peers, exchanging experiences. These are more important in order to be comfortable and start to apply and implement what we have learned. The last slide then is about looking at the considerations that we need to make. We have the preferences. We've talked about, the different ways that we learn and the different senses that we can use. But if we look at the considerations that we need to make, we need to think about learning styles, for example. So what are my preferences? We need, of course, to recognize the need and what is the need about. What is the need for change in the business? And therefore, what is the need when it comes to new behaviors and new abilities? The environment as such, where learning and training happens, accessibility, time, the different modes that we can use, and also spaced. So we do much more spaced training, not only the before, during, after, but before, during, in between, during, in between, during, and after. So, and then using also different types of modes. And the requirements that we see then is that training is needed and learning happens when it's needed in the context. It can be done individually, together, cross-functionally, psychologically safe, effective formats and modalities, also digital and physical, and also combined, comprehensive, but also modules and maybe even nuggets. Spaced learner experience, self-managed. So I know where I'm going. I know what I need to develop. So I can manage on my own as well and choose the things that I want to learn more about. Engaged managers that you've heard of, and also then in the end, the business impact verification. And this is something that I work a lot with. So that was a brief introduction then to Volvo Group and how we work with adult learning.
To our next speaker, who is Blair Sheppard, who is in a really unique position to contribute to our webinar today. He is currently the global leader for strategy and leadership at PwC, a position he's held since June 2012. But before that, he's been in the business school world for quite a number of years at Duke University, first as the Senior Associate Dean of Duke Fuqua, during which time they created their cross-continent MBA that rose in rankings 5th in the US. He also was then the founding CEO and chairman of Duke CE, or Duke Corporate Education, which was rated by leading business journals to be the world's top provider of custom executive education for 9 years in a row during his leadership. And then he became the dean of Duke Fuqua's School of Business, where, among other things, he was the primary architect of Duke's Kunshan University campus in China. He's been an advisor for more than 100 companies and governments in areas of leadership and corporate strategy, and also done a good bit of writing more than 50 articles and books. I'm sure for many like me, he's been a real inspiration in innovative executive education, and thus it's a great honor to have Blair with us today. Look very much forward to your comments. So I will turn over to you now, Blair.
Thanks, Carl. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you and see you beautifully.
Great. Perfect. So please, if you ever introduce me again, please don't use a long resume, just 2 sentences would be great, Carl. I suspect I know a lot of this audience, and I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk to you. Carl, I want to take your question really seriously and say, what are the things happening in the world that threaten the role of business schools as a source of learning for corporations? So let me do 3 things to describe that, and there are 3 T's, right? The first one is technology, the second one is transformation, the third one is things together. So let me do technology, and actually Howard did a really nice job of this. So I won't do the data behind it, but essentially we've entered a world where we're living the way we're talking to each other. And I think it's really important to think about sort of 2 questions, which is, what does that world do better than what you would see in a traditional classroom? And then what's left face to face? And if you take those 2 things, are business schools best positioned to do either of them, right? So the first one is content delivered compellingly is really well done in the form of media we now have. That actually video's great, the vehicles for getting people to understand things is fantastic. And then what happens is, once I produce it really, really well, I don't necessarily have to ever produce it again. So once I've done the best possible NPV education, I never have to do it again. And so what's the role of the individual professor who's trying to get people to understand that? The second thing, actually, I think the technology is doing now, which is virtual reality as the alternative here, which is empathy, actually. So one of the things we've been trying to do in a long time in universities is get people to understand, why is it someone feels the way they do? There's a whole debate about, can we put ourselves in other shoes? Well, actually, I literally can put you in someone else's shoes, have you experience it, understand it, and feel it. And therefore, the net result is I get you to see things and empathize about things you never could before because of the possibility of technology today. A third is we can actually do safe practice. So if I actually have a virtual reality capacity where you have gloves and all of the other pieces, I'd much rather you did surgery through that vehicle before you ever touch even an artificial dummy or clearly a human being. And so if you think about the number of things we need to do that actually are risky, but it'd be nice to have them done in a place where it feels real, we can now do that. And then final one is speed to scale. And you sort of step back and say, okay, so are business schools good at creating really, really cool video once and using it a lot? I'll ask you to ask that one. Are we really good at figuring out how to use virtual reality to create empathy? Are we really good at understanding how to create really good vehicles for safe practice? And are we good at speed to scale? All right. Then you sort of say, okay, well, what's left for face-to-face? Sort of Howard's notion of the kind of really premiumization of face-to-face. And I think there are 3 things left that make face-to-face still a really important thing. One of them is theater, right? That actually, it's really hard to do theater electronically. A second one is intimacy, the creation of a real sense of connectivity to people, which is part of why we're emphasizing safety as much as we are, which is the ability to create serious intimacy. And the final one is making context come to life, right? Making particular locations, situations, circumstances come to life, right? And again, if you come back and say, are business schools really good at theater? Are business schools really good at intimacy? Are business schools really good at context? I'll leave it to you to answer. So that's the first one, technology and what it's doing to what it means to learn today. Second one is transformation or transition. And this is the thing I want to highlight for all of us to consider. We have a decade to completely remake the agricultural system in this world, to completely remake the mobility system in the world, to completely remake our manufacturing system, to completely remake the construction system, and completely remake the energy system. and we're not doing it fast enough. And so one piece of evidence that none of us are doing what we should is we are not progressing with the speed we need to against those issues. But then if you unpack it and say, what are the two core learning needs in that transformation? There are two, right? The first one is the massive creation of new skills at huge scale, really, really fast, really well. All right. And so we need people to understand climate and operations at a level that we've never seen before. We need people to understand whole new forms of analysis of a level we've never seen before. And so it's the ability to create whole large numbers of professionally capable human beings really, really fast at scale, virtually overnight. Right? The second piece is the ability to lead the kind of transformation implied by what I just described, which is transformation that normally takes decades, centuries to do. We have to do in years, right? And so think about it for a minute. In order to do that, we have to have consideration of things that are really, really current and broadly current, that cover the whole waterfront of all of the issues associated with the transformation. We have to deliver that really quickly. So within PwC, for example, we've taken programs that typically take 6 months to 9 months and say, if you can't do it in 3 weeks, it ain't worth doing, right? They have to be systemic. They actually have to look at the consideration across a whole range of issues that are highly interdependent with each other. They have to sort of be able to translate to practice really, really quickly. And they have to be able to bring the future into the current crisis, which is illustrating the point for transformation, but it's actually just the first step in a massive change that needs to occur. Right? And so when you put all that together and you say, okay, our business schools really, do they have the whole range of knowledge that's necessary to actually understand the current issues? It takes the entire university to understand that. And in some ways, even that, there's things missing. Are we really good at bringing all that stuff to bear really, really quickly and designing it really quickly? Are really good at understanding how they fit with each other? So ask yourself, how good are business schools at doing kind of the closing course that puts it all together? It's a major challenge at a business school I've been associated with. Are we really good at translation to practice? Because actually, if I can't turn it to practice, I can't get it done fast enough as a leader. And then the final one is, are we good at sort of bringing the future into current reality? Because in a sense, we are data driven in a sense that causes us to look in the rearview mirror than necessarily in the windshield, right? So the transformation we have to go through itself challenges sort of the core construct of what business schools, even universities, are to allow us to create that. And then the final one is, we have to do things together that sort of feel mutually contradictory, right? So largely because the world I just described is ambiguous, it's interdependent, it's coming at us really fast, right? So let's give you two examples of what I mean by doing them together. It is clear that everyone who is leading an organization today at any level needs to be technologically savvy. But it's also clear that by being technologically savvy, they are likely to do massive damage if they're also not deeply human aware. Now, one of the challenges is that actually the technology capability tends to sit in double E departments and computer science departments and in other departments of that kind. The humans piece tends to sit in the social sciences and the humanities. And at some point, we need to put those two things together. And I'm not sure that business schools are strong in either of those two domains per se. Right. Second piece is, but we need, that's what we need in our leaders today. And we need in actually our practitioners today is the ability to put those two things together. And then the other one is actually, we need people who are massively politically capable, but have phenomenal integrity at the same time. Right. And so the interesting question is, how good are we at developing character? And how good are we at teaching people how to actually navigate the increasingly complex world we need to get things to happen as we need to, and actually do those simultaneously? So the question I put to all of you, and I really put this in the following sense, which is, I came from, was part of, and loved business schools. I spent 32 years of my life in one, or affiliated with one. And it worries me deeply that I'm saying what I'm saying. I just do not believe that the industry is moving fast enough to be as relevant as we need it to be in the world I just described. If it does not understand, not just know how to do the technology, but be able to do the things that the technology requires us to do to make learning effective, then business schools become less relevant. If business schools actually can't help us build real new capabilities at scale that never existed before and help us make the transformation of the kind we need to, then actually they become less and less relevant. And if they can't put together things that feel mutually contradictory and tend to be owned by departments in other parts of schools and other parts of the university, then they become of declining relevance, right? And I don't think that has to be, but I think you've got to hear the message I'm articulating and do something about it, because if you don't, we're doing it ourselves. Everything I just described, we're doing in PwC. Everything I just described, we will start doing for clients if you don't do it. And not because I want to, because I actually love the industry that all of you represent, but because we have no choice because the world needs it. And so, Carl, let me pause there.
Thank you very much, Blair, for sharing some interesting thoughts for us to reflect on. And I'm sure that'll lead to an interesting discussion at the end of the webinar. Does anyone have any direct questions for Blair now before we move on? Okay, if not, then let us move on to our fourth and final speaker before our interactive discussion. And that is Jena Davidson. She's the founder of Jenson 8, which is an HR tech company that is pioneering the application of behavioral psychology and immersive VR technology to revolutionize how business leaders and teams thrive in the fast-moving world that we just heard Blair talking about. So it'll be really interesting to hear some of the things that they're doing. They're both developing the technology and also using the technology, doing trainings themselves. So Jena, over to you.
Great, thank you, Carl and Blair. It was very interesting to just listen to what you were saying. I was kind of nodding and making notes as I was going along. But let me just perhaps go back a little bit, because Jenson 8 started in 2008, and we set up as a leadership development consultancy. There was no technology. It was a flip chart, circle of chairs, lots of post-it notes. And what I really enjoyed doing was bringing people together to talk about themselves, to talk about their vulnerable sides, to share their stories, so that the people around them, their teams, would build trust in them, would understand them more, would make less assumptions about the way they showed up, all the stuff that we know well. And today I still love the flip chart, the circle of chairs, and to listen to those stories. However, I could see that technology was coming kind of quickly, and that there had to be a space there to be able to use it intelligently, smartly, and to make a difference. So about 5 years ago, I set out to see if I could find a technology that I could use, and I didn't actually find anything I liked. So we decided to build our own platform. And where we sit today is something I think that is quite unique, and it certainly, I think it certainly ticks a lot of the boxes, Blair, that you were talking about. And Britta also aligned to the things that you were saying about the importance of that learning experience. And actually, I think when we started out 5 years ago, we were a bit too soon. I think people looked at the work that we were doing with virtual reality and they said, yeah, that's kind of cool, but we're not ready for it yet. Far too soon, far too soon. However, we kept going, and as we sit here now, and I think particularly post-COVID, I think that we've really found our space. So what do we do? So our platform uses virtual reality, but we use it quite specifically. For us, it's about bringing groups of people together to be able to create that intimacy, to be able to connect them, to be able to create a space where we can provoke thought, trigger feelings that will enable them to talk about themselves. We're very much focused on problem-solving experiences. So if we're going to use virtual reality, let's create an environment that really they can do something in. What we're not going to do is use virtual reality just to bring people into a meeting room, because you can do that on Zoom, you can do that on Teams. But what happens if you create an environment using virtual reality where you can bring people together from all over the world, particularly useful in COVID times where you couldn't leave your house, where they are able to connect, they're able to practice collaboration, communication, they're able to give each other feedback, which we know is really, really important. They're able to learn on the job, learn through doing, learn through being, learn through feeling. And that's what we're doing. And it's really, really powerful. And I think it now comes at that time where organizations are saying to us, oh, we get it now. Now we get it. This is, we're ready to use technology in a way that is impactful. So how we find our organizations using this, they like to embed it in programs. So we've recently worked with an organization where they were looking at the culture of curiosity and courage. They run big leadership programs. They used to bring people together, but right now they can't. And what they wanted to do was to find an impactful way where they could bring their leaders together, and they were able to practice scenarios to increase their self-awareness, to see where they are on the curiosity scale, where they are on the courageous scale. And through going through our experiences, they were able to do that. And they don't take long. I mean, we can put people into an experience for half an hour, a couple of hours, and quite quickly people will show themselves. And then they'll move forward from that. Not only will they show themselves, but they'll be more open to talking about the things that they have just experienced. And Britta touched on this as well, the importance of psychologically being safe, psychological safety. I think it's something that actually gets talked about a lot. And I'm interested to know how much it's used in day-to-day organizations, how well people do it. Certainly what we have found is that when we take groups of people and we put them into our multiplayer virtual reality scenarios, it creates a space where they're more open to talking about the things that they do well, the things that they don't do so well. They're more open to receiving feedback from those people around them relative to that experience. And then they're more open to talking about real situations, what they do in their day-to-day and how they want to do things differently. So again, building trust, creating a space where they're open to trying new things. These all seem to be, I think, amplified in the way that we're working. But it hasn't all been easy. As I say, 5 years ago, people, I think it was a hard sell. And certainly people wanted to stay physically together. The concept of putting on a headset was far too out there. And also the wanting to learn new technology. And I think we still see that. I'm often asked about the barriers, what makes it difficult to bring in new technology? And it's not always easy, as I say. And one of the things is around having to put a headset on. That's quite an alien concept for most people. And although in the consumer world it's become far more popular, still within corporate, most people don't have access to a headset. So first of all, you've got to get access to a headset. The second piece, and Howard, I think actually I was interested in one of the slides that you showed at the beginning, which was around broadbands and bandwidth, and actually being at home and being properly set up with Wi-Fi. And being on your own with a headset and knowing how to put it on. So us at Jenson A, what we've worked very, very hard on is the customer experience. Excuse me. If we're expecting people to embrace new technology, then we've really got to empower and enable them to be able to use it. So we've worked very hard on setting up that whole customer experience from the time that headset arrives to using it, to either them keeping it or sending it back, because there's nothing worse than putting somebody off before they've even started. So customer experience is exceptionally important. And then the third thing I'd say about virtual reality and headsets and hardware, and again, Blair, you talked about it, which is around speed to scale and being able to scale up with VR. There's certainly a way to be able to use as many headsets as you want, but then you need to be able to have as many headsets as you need. And certainly what we're finding in the work that we're doing with our clients is that it's one thing to have perhaps 5,000 or 10,000 headsets. And of course, we know there are organizations out there who now have 100,000 headsets, but that's not yet the norm because this is still very, very early days. So I think that the positives of virtual reality and being able to create great, effective, impactful experiences is one thing. However, getting to that scale where the headset perhaps becomes like the mobile phone, I think, and we know that we're a bit of a way off that. I think the final thing I want to say is that I do believe that the future and using technology is out there, but there's always this reminder about how and when to use it. And people say to me, "Oh, well, could you create a virtual reality environment which is just us being together on a trade floor?" And I think that where we can come together and where we can see each other, we should still do that. But where there are opportunities to use technology where we can keep human at the center of what we do, then I believe that virtual reality is a very good place to be. But I'm quite happy now just to take some questions or to join in on that panel, Carl.
Okay, do we have any specific questions for Jena before we move to our more open panel discussion? So I think the questions, we do have a couple questions here, but I think they're more general in nature. So let's move forward to discuss those. And if everyone can turn on their videos here, I will try to allow you to do so here in a second. And in the meantime, perhaps I can ask one general question, and that is, could everyone think a little bit about some concrete thing? And you've talked in your talks a little bit about this, but some concrete thing that you're doing to try to help apply learnings that you're having in executive education programs. So, I mean, I think in business schools, many people are great teachers, so good at communicating content. But what we really need to work on is how to apply these learnings. And one of the things that a lot of executive education programs have is some sort of business improvement project or sort of consulting project, some sort of project that students are working on. But how do you make sure that it doesn't sort of stay as a part of the training program and really gets, applied? Could we get a little focused discussion around this? And Britta, maybe we can start with you, and you can comment the extent you're using such sort of projects in your programs and what you do to really help them have impact on Volvo.
Yes, of course. Yes, there are some, particularly in the leadership programs, where, of course, the business or the organization that sends their participant, that they bring projects into the program. But I would rather talk about certain programs where we don't have any content. So leadership programs on the basic levels and a couple of levels up, where there is only a facilitator and there is a team of participants, and each member brings a problem. And they each have time during a number of sessions where they share their problem or where they practice coaching and feedback and sharing experiences in order to help their colleague in the program. So there is no content other than what they feel is really crucial. And then they follow up also. So if I share something in the first session, everyone will ask next session, so how did it go? So that's a very, very concrete example, I think, of bringing reality into the program.
Thanks. That's a great example. Blair, would you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, we don't use projects because actually there's enough going on in the real world that we need to do that, right? So in a sense, what we're now doing is we'll bring a real client. We'll actually bring a real problem a person's grappling with. We will bring, and so it's to Britta's point that actually the issue of a project in the speed at which the world is happening, projects are artificial. So just use the thing that actually exists, and there's a lot of them. So you don't have to go find things.
Mm-hmm. Can you comment a little bit about how I suspect some people with the approach you talk about might worry of sort of exposing yourself to the client a little bit, and some things you can do better and so forth if the client becomes part of the learning program, although it can be a great learning possibility. Can you comment a little bit about any extent that you're concerned about that, or you just don't worry about it at all? How do you deal with that?
So there are some things we do where we actually we use the client as the presenting challenge and we don't have the client there. But actually one of the things we're doing increasingly is sort of design labs where the client and our participants are in the room at the same time, right? I mean, at some level, if you live in the world we live in, you kind of have to co-design the future together, right? If you don't do that, then I think in some ways we're not going to get the answers at the speed or scale we need them. And so, yeah, there's a lot of risk, but there's greater risk in nothing happening, Carl, actually. So we'd rather take that risk. And then again, to Britta's point, which is actually the person brings themselves to a conversation, right? Rather than, and so it isn't always client, it's whatever the nature, depending on the program you're doing, you want the right presenting question to be the one that's relevant to the thing you're trying to get across, right? So it's a leadership problem. They bring themselves as a leader. If it's what's going on in the world and how to respond to it, you bring a client. If it's what do we do about our own organization transformation, you bring our own organization. And so it's whatever the need is. And I think Carl being afraid of that. Just a quick example. I remember teaching with one of the best strategy profs I ever taught with. The guy was just ridiculously good, right? Just scary good. But he always taught a case, right? And the reason, and so I said to him, and we were doing a program with a very interesting client. It's been pretty serious. So I said, why don't you bring the client's own issues? And he said, because I don't know the answer. And I asked him, I said, what is the question someone could ask you haven't thought about 100 times already? He said, Blair, I don't know, but there's going to be one, and I need to know the answer. Right? So the fear, I think, is in the teacher more than it is in the student. Carl.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And by the way, when I talked about projects, I actually meant projects in the organization. Maybe I wasn't clear about that. So
yeah, but I actually mean bring their own problems. I mean, in a sense, the problems, projects tend to be things that are identified to make a program happen, right? You can't afford that anymore. I mean, and I understand you meant that in a sense of what you mean is bring the thing that's real in the moment. Absolutely. But a lot of what we do is say we're doing a development program, therefore we need projects to support the development program. That's not a helpful thing.
Yeah, no, indeed. I think you bring up a good point about, when you have the real activities that people are working on, then you get rid of the problem of how do you have this disconnect between that you do this great work and it actually gets used, which I think is a problem that many executive education programs have faced. Jena, do you have something you'd like to add to this discussion?
Yes, many things, but I think something around the relevance. So if I think about the way in which we're working, so as a consultant, we will deliver programs using our virtual reality platform that will be implemented into companies' programs. However, where they're really heading, what our clients really want is they want to be able to do it themselves. So we will enable organizations, internal facilitators, coaches, and so forth to be able to run these programs themselves. So companies want they want to get rid of consultants, don't they? That's, if they want to pay the money they want to pay. But what if they can do it themselves? And not only because it makes commercial sense, but also it's exciting. So when I talk to some of the companies that we're working with, and they say, wouldn't it be great if our facilitators could use this new cool tech, not only because it's new and cool and engaging, but actually it's really great for them to be able to facilitate in a different way. Because I certainly know, having hired and trained many facilitators over the years, that a facilitator, frankly, can make and break a good session. And the point that you just made, Blair, around how that facilitator has to have the confidence to be able to hold a group of people together. They need to be able to dig deep, yet psychologically safety, holding them, that is not easy. And I think for some people that comes more naturally than others. And certainly I think about the way in which we're working with our platform, because we can ask questions that are aligned with the experience. It helps people a little. I think they feel a bit safer, yet they're more exposed. And the one thing I didn't mention earlier is not only do we use VR in the way we do, but we've also created our own psychometrics. So we actually have data that comes out of the system so that facilitator can have the confidence to also go, let's ask this question, let's talk about it, and here's some data that sits alongside to almost give me a bit more confidence. So I think there has to be, there's definitely something here to look at, which is the future are organizations who want to be accountable for their own leadership. They want to be accountable for the success of their own organizations. And it should be the people internally, surely, who are running those sessions and owning it. And I think more technology is going to come through that enables people to do that. It's a start, it's early days, but it's certainly coming.
Thanks, Jenna. So could we talk a little more about your VR technology? So a lot of the people that are online with us today are teaching international business. And in fact, all the world is becoming much more international, of course. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the applications you see of the technology you have to, for example, someone who's been working in a domestic context and you're getting ready to send to a country they have no experience with, or someone who's going to take on a leadership role in a more multinational team. I guess there must be some really interesting applications. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to clarify, that everything that we focus on is around leadership development, team effectiveness. We're all about people. What we're not doing with VR is we're not going to technically help somebody to drive a tractor or use a crane. It's all about people. And so again, the way in which we use VR is groups of people. We're not me against an avatar. It's how we're real. It's all real people making real interactions, doing real work. And I think one of the ways in which it's quite interesting is the way in which the dynamics that can come through, to the point you've just made, Carl, about if you imagine somebody coming into a role, an international role where they've had no international experience, and how are they going to sit or fit within a team, within a function, within an organization. And there's a little bit of anonymity, because in the experiences that we have, of course, you do show up as an avatar. You don't have to pretend to be that cyborg, that robot, or whatever, but you are in a way a little bit protected from it. And certainly what we have noticed in quite diverse groups is that people will show up perhaps a little bit more honestly. And the other thing is, when you go into an experience like this as a group of people, it's a bit of a leveler, because if you're going in for the first time as a group where nobody knows what to do, you can't necessarily hang on to the experience because you haven't had experience in it. So a group of people who get thrown into a situation where this is the first time, they don't know what to do and how to do it, being on that level is really quite a great experience, isn't it? It can be quite empowering, and you can come in and be who you want to be. And I think that really helps for international diverse groups. You're not hiding behind something. Perhaps there's less bias.
Great, thanks. We have a couple questions online, and two of them are directed to Blair. The first, Blair, to you, I think it's from Martin Lockett. And that is asking, do the current incentives and career patterns in business schools mean that they will lose out? And there was another person who asked, you talked about a lot of sort of fast paced changes that we need to respond to. are business schools worse than, for example, a PwC type organization or corporate university in all of these? Or is there something that is sort of the strength of business schools you could point to? Could you answer these two for us, Blair?
Yeah, happy to, but I'd love to get Britta. Are you using VR at all? Because one of the things we're using it for is increasing empathy, which is really the point you were getting to, Carl, a bit about international, which is you can actually put someone in shoes they don't live in otherwise, and they experience it. And I think actually that Jena gets that to happen because she mixes the groups. But I think, Carl, it's a really important thing that actually I get to be someone I'm not, and because I am, I actually learn a lot about the ways in which I'm not successful, particularly in an international context. So, Britta, I'm just wondering if you do that at all before we move on, because I think that question is a really important question.
That's great. Britta, can you talk if you're using VR at all?
Yes, we are. We are just starting, but it is mainly in the technical area, and it is, for example, training service technicians on electromobility. So how to detach a battery in a truck, for example. So this is also, but practicing. And of course, they are avatars in the VR experience. But we have not started yet. We have it on our list, but we haven't started yet with the more social relationship, difficult situations, difficult discussions, and things like that. So,
Blair, perhaps
but
you
it's on our
could
list.
explain a little more also how you're using this at PwC, and maybe also respond to one other question that sort of came to my mind while Jena was talking. When I teach in certain countries, I find it's a lot harder to get people to engage. And so it occurred to me that perhaps this avatar approach might be particularly useful in certain cultures that are more hierarchical. So you would feel like you're not you, sort of, especially if you have mixed teams and you wanted people to engage with more senior leadership, more timid cultures, et cetera. Wonder if you've experienced that at all, and if you could talk a little how PwC is using VR. Blair, I think you're muted. We don't hear you right now.
By the way, can you hear now?
Yes.
Yeah, Britta just gave a great example of a safe practice application of VR. I don't want someone changing a battery out the first time live, right? I actually rather do it VR. and so it's a great use of safe practice. I think on the empathy side, Carl, two things in this, right? I think we are actually using it to get people to sort of be in places they've never been before so they can experience what it's like to be in that place. And it works really well as a tool that way, right? I think your other point's a really good one, which is one of the challenges we've had, particularly with electronically mediated education, is that actually the people from some of our cultures in Asia just don't like participating, particularly in team activities. And the nice thing about virtual reality is you suck them in, right? And they get engaged in ways they didn't otherwise. And so I think it's a great way to, in a sense, when I was at a business school, we would take 2 or 3 weeks with an international program saying, here's what you have to do to actually be good in a business school. And we sort of get them to unlearn their culture, which I think was a really bad thing, by the way. But actually, in this case, you actually get them to come in a way that feels safe, to Britta's point about safety, and engaging so they actually participate and enjoy it. And so I think it's a really important use of VR. So anyway, I'm sorry for going out, but I thought that question was actually
no, it's great that we could stick with that a little bit. So again, the question from Martin Lockett was, do the current incentives and career patterns in business schools mean that they will lose out? And then another person would ask the question, are business schools inferior to other players like PwC and all the challenges that you mentioned?
Yeah.
What are the strengths?
So let me do the last one first. I think actually individual faculty are pretty fast. I think the problem is that the governance systems in universities are slow, right? And so if you say, do we have people on this call who are staying up with current reality? For sure. But I worry that we actually just have a methodology that doesn't allow the organization to move as quickly as it should. The thing I think that which mixes a little with the incentive issue, because much of the research activity of universities is empirical. By definition, it's historical, right? Because you can't have data about the future. Right. And the incentive to produce compelling evidence that is empirically derived is actually, I think, problematic for the world we live in, right? And I don't mean to say that we shouldn't be data driven, but I do mean we need to be prospective in how we think. So an interesting example, if you look at the journal Foreign Affairs, as they're trying to write about what's going on in this world, they go back to articles that were written 40 or 50 years ago because people actually knew how to write to that world 40 or 50 years ago. And we've kind of unlearned it with our incentive systems in universities today, right? We don't have kind of grand strategists per se in the way we used to. We don't have kind of the interdependent pieces. Back in the 19th century, presidents of many universities taught the last course about what does it mean to be a citizen when you put all this together. We don't teach those courses anymore, right? And so I think there is ways in which we have created incentives that make it hard to do some of the things we need in the world today, right? And I think it isn't so much that PwC is better or any of the organizations in the world are better. I think one of the things we have working for us is because we have 300,000 people, we probably have an expert on everything somewhere in the world, right? And so we just have to go find that person. And then put them together in a way. I think we are more willing to put them together than you would across the university. So for example, because of the school structure of universities, there isn't as much sharing of the content expertise as we need. So if we were going to do a program around ESG, for example, and I went to Duke to do that program, I want the engineering school involved. I want the philosophy department involved. I want the forest and the environmental school involved. I want the business school involved. I want the medical school involved in public health. And and actually that's a really hard thing to do in a university because every boat on its own bottom, right? And so I think it's not just are people staying up, it's just the system making it hard to bring that to the client the way the client needs it, is the question, Carl.
Okay, great. That's surely true. And if you figure out the answer to that, please do let us know. One of the things that I think everyone is probably facing is the challenge of how to deal with executive education in post-COVID. And it seems to me that this is increasingly going to be blended to some degree, maybe just a little bit blended, in other words, a little bit online and a lot in person, or vice versa. I'm wondering if you could each comment on one thing, if you think there is one thing, that can be done better online than in person, because I think there are some things, and I think we sometimes forget about that. And then perhaps if you could comment something about, sort of what you see as a good blended design, and it'll obviously vary from program to program. So Britta, maybe we can start with you. One thing that works well online, better online.
Oh, it's a very good question. I think first of all that we did transform many of the instructor-led trainings, both those with very specific content and on topics, but also the leadership, different leadership and project management trainings, for example. And I think one thing that is really enhanced with the way that we're using Teams and we are using the Microsoft environment is that you can continue your chat with your peers long after your program is over. So using that as a way to continue the dialogue, to continue to keep in touch, to continue post questions, etc. That is much, much better than if you had met live, because then you would have had to add that part of the environment. And we typically didn't do that, not a lot at least. So I think that's really one thing that enhances and prolongs the learner journey and also builds very strong networks between peers.
Great. Blair, would you like to maybe comment?
Let me do three, I guess. One of them is scope and scale. So you can bring the world together online in a way you can't physically. And I think you can do massive numbers of people online and actually have it feel really engaging if it's done right? So scope and scale. I think the second thing is I think you can actually create more compelling content online. A really great movie, really well done, is better than the best prof, right? And you can repeat it and use it again and again and again and again and again for certain kinds of content, right? And I think you can actually create empathy online in a way that's hard to do face to face, because you can force someone to become someone they're not, which is you can't do face-to-face. So you know the old argument that I can never understand what it's like to be X, whatever it was, because I never lived their life. Actually, I can get you to live a little bit of their life in a way where they can say, oh, boy, I didn't know that's how it felt to be that person in that circumstance, right? And so I think those would be three I'd describe.
Great, thanks very much. Jena, how about you?
I was thinking about the amount of time it takes to get people together in the old world, where you'd get on a plane to travel across the world, then you'd stay 2 days in a hotel, then you'd have to do that supper or that lunch and play bowls or do something, that was, so a lot of time out of the office, having to fly, being away from family, where actually today you can put your VR headset on from home and you can connect and you can do all the things actually Britta and Blair have talked about already, so I won't repeat. So that makes such a difference, doesn't it? 3 hours coming together to create that intimacy, intense, impactful experience, as opposed to 2 days out of the office, plus with everything that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think one of the real challenges that I felt before we started using more things online was, one, that you pretty much had these 3-day or 5-day blocks, and then people would go back and not so much would happen. You would sort of try to have something happening, but it wouldn't really be too much, and then you'd have another block of this, and you couldn't have too many blocks. You were always discussing, I really would like to have 5 blocks, and the company would be like, no, we'd like to have only 2 blocks. And the chance to have some shorter online interactions in between, I think really helps, especially with implementation, but also just the continual learning and probing people. The other thing that was always a frustration for me is sometimes, having such an uneven starting point for programs where, some people would know everything about finance and the other person, wouldn't understand how to read a balance sheet at all. And I think that online education allows us to have much more personalized, and not only in that way, but in all sorts of different ways. So I wonder, in keeping with that, if any of you could talk about this personalization. I think executive education is becoming much more personalized. Are there any things you see in your organizations that you're doing this? Perhaps we can start with you, Jena, when you're working with some of your clients.
Yeah, so I think the ways in which we're personalizing, but maybe I might use the word customize slightly because it's more from an organization perspective than a personal, is that, and I mentioned briefly, so we have our immersive experiences. However, we also have the psychometric, so the ability to be able to gather the data. And one of the things that we're noticing from our organizations is, yes, that's great, but what about if we want to create psychometrics that are aligned with our own value statements of the behaviors that we use, the programs that we do? So that's really where we start to customize, is that we're able to offer this platform to our clients where they can have the experience, but the data that we gather is aligned to their frameworks, their leadership frameworks. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the reports that then go back to the individuals are very much personalized to where they are on their development, so they can continue to develop as individuals, but also as within their teams as well.
Britta, do you have something to add on how you might be personalizing things at all, or customizing things at all?
Yes, a couple of examples. For example, we have a program or developing a program around working more agile when it comes to projects and how we can do that. And it's really about servitization in the end, where we're looking at bringing everyone up to a certain base camp, we call it. And then from there, you can take different routes. And then one way we are personalizing is to test and see, where are you? So what are the things that you could skip? Maybe there are certain things that you prioritize more, so that you can choose different paths up that mountain or up that route. So this is one thing. It's another area where we're testing this is also in the compliance area, where we know that the requirements around compliance for different roles, for different parts of the company, meeting different regulations in different countries, etc. That here we also need to be more automated, and thereby also we can be more personalized as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Those are some good examples. Blair, anything you'd like to suggest?
Yeah, just sort of two thoughts, Carl, on that point that are, because the most important points have already been made. First is, I think there's a really important issue, which is much of what we've done for the last 100 years in education is to exclude people. We've essentially said, you don't have this, and therefore you're not allowed to be in this program. You don't have, and so we exclude people. I think the potential for personalization is to actually include way more people than we did before, right? Because essentially you can say, there's things you're weak at, so we'll run a program that gets you to proficiency. Right. And it turns out once you get into proficiency, they're probably as good or better than the people we would have included because of the history they brought with them or the GPA they had or whatever the thing is they had. And so we're testing questions about, can you have a high school student be a CPA, and we never would have entertained that before until you had this potential to sort of say, can we be more inclusive in the way in which we do what we do? That's the first point I think is really critical about personalization. The second one I'd add to Britta, which is if you take where she went to do the logical extension of it, you can actually let people personalize their career and map that to the learning journey they have for themselves, right? And I think that's hugely powerful. The person says, so what do you want the next 10 years to look like? And they say, I don't know, but so just give us a journey and we'll help you start it. And then what happens is they start the journey and then you pause 6 months in and say, how does it feel? What else do you think they do? And then they can create the curriculum that allows them to build that capability as long as you can badge along the way. And I think that the kind of personalization of a career and inclusiveness are two massive opportunities that come from your question, Carl.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Indeed, it sounds like a good way forward. So I wonder if anyone in the audience might have some questions you would like to ask. Either you can put them in chat, or I'd be happy to unmute you and let you ask that orally. Please just raise your virtual hand if you have something you would like to orally say. Anyone out there? We've got a lot of experienced people I see among others. We have Catherine Shin here and Eve Doss and a number of other people with a lot of exec ed experience. Maybe you have something from your work to share with us or someone else. I see we have Martha Misnevsky as well. Anyone have something you would like to ask or comment on? Well, we'll let you think about that while we move on here a little bit. One of the things that I find with my clients is that they used to sort of look, does this person have a good executive education bio? And if they do, they would say, okay, we'll hire this person and have them do a program. Now they increasingly want to say, we actually want to have proof as part of the program. Can you include some actual measurement to show that you're actually having an effect in what you do? And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about this and some interesting ways of doing that. Perhaps we can start with you, Blair, on this one.
I'm not looking at the camera. I'm actually looking at the faces on the screen. And so I apologize. I'm not making eye contact with people, but the faces are fantastic to speak to. So I think a couple of things. If I go back to the first point, Carl, around that if we get people to focus on the things that are real at work, you actually have an immediate set of information about how well they're doing, right? So if we are trying to change a client conversation by having our partners able to have much broader, more interesting, broad-reaching discussions and get to, so what are the outcomes you're really trying to achieve? We can actually track that through our client relationship management tool, right? If we're saying we want to get this particular outcome to occur, we can actually see whether the outcome's happening, right? And so the more you can connect the learning to the business problem that you have at the moment in time, which is why it needs to be done really quickly, you can actually use real business metrics as measures of whether or not you're achieving what you want to achieve, right? Then I think in the other case, it has to do with, there are things like, is a person being selected more for projects because of the profile they have or not, right? And do they make themselves more attractive or less attractive as a result of what they're doing, right? And so there are both, you could think about social metrics inside the firm related to utilization, things like that, and actually business metrics that are different from the sorts of things we used to have, which is, did you learn what you were supposed to learn, and did you apply it in practice? those two things are intermediates to did it actually do anything of value, right, Carl? And I think that we can get to both of those now, right? And even in the very concrete piece, we take this issue, someone has to learn a particular skill that's kind of risky. If we can actually use a methodology to get them to learn that skill and de-risk it, then we can actually see how quickly they do it when they do it in real application. And so I think to me, there's a chance to be very real in a way we haven't for a long time in Exec.
Great, thanks. Britta or Jena, would you like to add anything about measurement? How we can measure that we're having
Yes, I can go.
Please.
And it's about our governance, the governance of the corporate university. So we have an advisory board for what we call academies, so clusters of topics and portfolios. And we set the direction together with that advisory board. And in that advisory board, we have the top executives, so people in the board of directors. So in the technology area, for example, we have the chief technology officer as the chairperson, and then other representatives from other organizations. So there is a very clear context for the needs that come and the requests that come that way. In some cases, it can be simple things or short or limited. In some cases, like now, for example, it is large areas where we have many people that need to be trained, for example, and that there are business activities depending on that we succeed. So, for example, if we are not training, again, back to the fully electric vehicles, if we're not training people in how to disconnect the battery, then we cannot perform our business in the end. This is one very tangible part. But there are others as well. So we always start, when we have a new request, we always start to understand what is the business change that this is driving, because that helps us to understand also what is the behavior, what is the ability that the participants need to develop, and what do they need to learn then? What is the knowledge content? What do they need to practice, etc., in order to be successful?
Okay, great. Yeah, I can see that that could be helpful. Jena, I guess you must have clients ask you this all the time. You're asking for a lot of money. If you design this system, how can you prove that it actually adds value? What's your answer?
I was thinking that question, the tangible question, is one whether it's anything to do with technology, a flip chart, or you're just sitting opposite somebody. It's the hardest thing, I think, isn't it, to be able to sometimes answer. But I think I'm really echo what Blair and Britta have said. But first of all, being really clear in the problem that we're being asked to solve for, of course, always helps to be able to give and to know the success factors. One of the ways that we do it is really around the feedback. And again, this was alluded to earlier, I think, in Britta's presentation, about the need for, if you're doing ongoing development, then there should be those check-in points the whole way along. We're checking in. Is this working? Has it worked? What do I need to change? Because learning is a continuum, isn't it? We don't just come out of a workshop and suddenly we're amazing. We're on this kind of journey, and therefore for every bit of everything that we do, a workshop, a conversation, if there's a learning there, then we can tweak and continue to develop. So the ways in which we would, I guess, say this has been a successful workshop is to make sure that we can gather the feedback, we can gather those data points, and as long as we can see things moving in the right direction, then we know that we're adding to that success. So that's the way in which we would work.
Okay, thanks. So Catherine Shin has shared a question with us, which maybe we can reflect on. It says, how can business schools and companies collaborate more effectively in light, sorry, lost that here. Sorry, I think in light of the new technological, sorry, I keep on losing the question here.
In light of new technology and increasing needs of customization.
Great, thanks very much. Britta, do you want to start with that since you got the question so well?
Good. Yes, I think that there are some great opportunities. And one thing is that you can bring in people from the business schools and also from universities to a great extent, much more easy when you do it virtual. And you can also do that, and you can record like we're doing today. You can share, so that that investment that you make is, in that sense, a bit smaller than if we go back 5 years. It takes less. People are more easily accessible for these types of activities. So that's one example.
Great. Would anyone else like to contribute to that?
Yeah, just to say, I think it's when it comes to collaborations and partnerships and customization, I think it's to be really clear about what you're good at and what you're not, and where you want to invest time. And so if I think about, again, some of the clients that we work with, they may say, we really like that, we like that, we like that. What if we want to do our own one? And so I will say that's fine. But if we start with a blank piece of paper, to actually go through that whole design process, to come up with something that does actually make a difference, is impactful, isn't gimmicky, it might take you a couple of years and a lot of money. And don't forget all about the testing. And let's just be, suddenly it's a aha moment of, okay, well, let's just look at this. So understanding that technology answers some things, but it's not the answer to everything, I think is really important. And then in any kind of partnership, it's play to your strengths, isn't it? Because otherwise you can go down a pretty dark hole and waste quite a lot of money. So I think carefully understanding what you do best and collaborate.
Great. Blair, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, Carl, if I go back to your return question, right, and put it together with the one you just asked, I think there's a really important point, which is if you really work with a client organization and help and create a thing that is actually suited to their need, the ROI is always ridiculous, right? I mean, in fact, you go to a line executive and say, this is a return, here's your investment, here's the outcome that occurred as a result of that investment. You have a 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1, 100,000 to 1 return on investment. Every dollar you got X euro back, right? And so in a sense, if you can really get the linkage to the organization, then the question of ROI becomes largely inconsequential because you're really achieving the things the organization wants. I think that requires two things. It requires the organization to actually realize what Jenna said, which is what do we do well and not do well, right? And it requires the university to do the same thing. And then it requires serious collaboration, both in design and execution, and even in ideation, right? And I think if you get that, what happens is the faculty who engage in that are way more interesting as a result of being forced to do context. And that the organization gets kind of the creative minds that actually you can only get when you get that kind of paired activity. And so I think, but it requires humility on both sides, Carl, and that's a tough thing occasionally.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I do agree that moving forward as we're sort of trying to push here. Indeed, you tend to get, if you get good alignment, you're going to get some value. I still, however, think that for a while, executive education was just sort of sexy enough that people just wanted to do it. And I think I see at least clients I work with becoming much more cost conscious now, much more wanting to truly see that this adds value. And so I think it's no longer enough that you're a great business school or a great professor. I think you really do have to make the case in somewhat more detailed fashion now than is the case, even if you are sort of putting together the parties with good alignment such that it's more likely to add value. One of the things that I've noticed is that, sort of the Harvard Business School case, which I think was the bread and butter of executive education programs for a long time, is losing interest in many executives today. And I, at least myself, see I'm using a lot more, video cases, live cases where, sharing problems from inside the organizations and guiding discussions around these. Many faculty feel a little bit more uncomfortable with some of these methods. As Blair mentioned, you can't really prepare for some of these as much. And so I have two things, since you are all leaders of organizations doing training. One is, what methodologies are you seeing? Are you seeing the same thing? And, what methodologies are you using to partially replace the traditional Harvard case? And the second is, as a leader of an executive education organization, what can you do to help faculty who are not so comfortable, facilitating these sort of somewhat unplanned discussions? I mean, of course, you can plan to some degree, but it's not to the same extent as if you have a written Harvard Business School case. So perhaps, Blair, we can start with you and then move to others.
Yeah, I think this is a really hard one. So a couple of things. First of all, one of the things you need to do is rethink your juxtaposition to the group you're participating with. A lot of us grew up thinking we were in the front of a room. You're in the side of a room. You're no longer in the front of a room. And you're working with and coaching and supporting and counseling, I think, right? And because in a sense, the danger is if you think you've got to be in the front of the room, it means you need to know the answer. And in problems as ambiguous and complex and fast coming as they are, there isn't a known answer, right? And in the ones where there is, it's a really technical answer, right? And probably better captured through some other medium. So I think you've got to say, we're at the side, we're not in the front of, the first point. Second one is, I think you actually have to, one of the other things I got to do is think about how do you help the participants from the program be successful? So are there ways you can take the insights you have around how to present and how to facilitate and how to guide and make the executives who are working with you be really good versions of themselves? So do you have a taxonomy of what makes a good executive, what executives are good at or not good at, and go find the person who's really good at a discussion, the person who's really good in the front of the room, a person who's really good at debriefing individuals, whatever. And so then collaborating with the people on the other side to help them be better, which is really in a sense what Jena said is the one thing she does is she's teaching the organization how to be good at what they do. I think that's actually, that kind of generosity is really important for business schools to do if they want to actually reposition themselves in the world, right, in a way. And then I think the final thing, Carl, is think about having more than one person involved, because I think the problems are too interdependent and too complex, and we need lots of multidisciplinarity brought to bear, including from multiple schools, not just one school. And so those would be my first three thoughts.
Great, thank you very much, Blair. Great suggestions. And indeed, getting multiple people together is a great thing that many people are trying, although doesn't always happen as naturally and easily as we would like. So maybe that's something we can talk about more moving forward. Jena, you have something you'd like to add to this?
So I was thinking about one of the things that we've been doing recently as looking at the facilitator experience, and how mentioned earlier, it's not easy, I don't think, to hold a group and hold attention and then also get people to open up and all of those things and make sure they leave with a great experience and all the things that we want them to do. So we have been training our facilitators to actually be in headset, so they can be in the experience with that group of people wherever they are around the world, where they're able to observe by being right next to them, to get involved, to ask those questions, to be involved as much as they want to be. And it's been really interesting to get the feedback from the facilitators about what it feels like to be in that experience with the people, the way in which they can be part of that intimacy, they can be part of that excitement, they can feel it. So certainly, I'm really interested to develop that. It's still early days, but the more we train up our facilitators to do this, interested to see how they how their own practice actually even improves. So that's one area that we're exploring. Plus, what you said already.
We'll have to check back with you in a year. Britta, how about you at Volvo? What are you doing to try to help your facilitators deal with sort of these new ways of training?
We train them. We train facilitators, of course. So we train them in basic facilitation skills, depending on what is the program. Is it, a content program? Then we train the facilitation of that, and how they can run different exercises and practices, etc., in the program. And if it is a program like I mentioned earlier, where there is no content really, then of course it's other types of skills. We do have from time to time also people from the universities that we collaborate with in some way, and where we also can support when it comes to the way that you convey the message, for example, or the way that you interact with the group and so forth. And I really like what you said, Blair, about not being in front of the room, but being part of the group rather. And that can really take off some of the pressure for some of the people that we bring in and that we work with. So yeah, just a few examples here.
Great. So there's another question that I think is directed to you, Britta. It says, referring to what was alluded to as providing a safe psychological space, is an inherited problem with exec ed that students usually do not pay for their education and take it for granted, or have no incentive to learn or practice what they have learned? How can we deal with this? Any suggestions, Britta?
Well, it's a very interesting question. So it's connecting this safe psychological space and an inherited problem with executive education. Let's see, and take for granted they have no incentive to learn or practice what they learn. Yeah, there may be. I mean, when people come to training, typically they have asked for it. It's very seldom that they have been told to take training, unless it's something that is really necessary for a legal reason, for example. Yeah.
Maybe that's the key thing, right? Not to have organizations sending everyone blindly to sort of trainings, but having people volunteer to sort of sign up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you take, and there was another question higher up also about the budget and how do we pay, or how does the, what sets the limits really for how much training and education you can consume or participate in. And that is really very, very tightly tied to where am I working? What is the organization that I'm working? What are the priorities that we are focusing on right now? What are the team priorities? What are the gaps in competence or abilities that we're lacking, etc.? And that dialogue, of course, is between the employee and the manager to a great extent.
So perhaps I can ask one other question that sort of builds on what Catherine Shin asked earlier, because I think her question had a lot of parts, so we didn't get as much into this, and that is about the collaboration, because we're lucky today to have three people, not from business schools, talking to an audience of a lot of people working in business schools. So can we talk a little bit more about the collaborative possibilities? I mean, surely there are things that each party is better at. What can we do to collaborate together? And Britta, you started to talk about this a few minutes ago. Maybe you can expand a little bit more on some things you do and some things you could see happening.
Yes, and it's some of the areas that I know, or I'm sure there are much more things that I'm not aware of, but it's a lot in the technology areas, of course, and where we see a need to bring in professors and others from the universities or the schools nearby, or they don't even need to be nearby, that have the knowledge, that have the insights, and maybe they are researchers and so forth. And this, it's easier to do it now. And where we also can, and when needed, we can record, we can make it more easily available, of course, provided that we have the permission to do that. So we've had, for example, one type of activity that we've called a masterclass, which is typically then could be a visiting professor, for example, to the business school in Gothenburg. So we had one on price management couple of years ago, for example, speaking and really interacting also with people in the different business organizations on price management. And we had several sites connected. And there were also facilitators on the sites, and you could pose questions, etc., much like what we're doing now. So this is one example of interactions that we do.
Great. Blair, how about you? Some possibilities for interaction?
I think that actually where the greatest opportunity for collaboration exists is in making sense of things we don't yet understand well. So I'll give you two examples if I can. We have put together in the United States a trust institute. And